So for so many, kind of 30 means, well, you need to be really settled in your career. You have to have figured out where you're going and kind of in the process of climbing that corporate ladder. Or if you founded your own, but like if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you had to kind of make it happen by now. But also in your personal life, right? Like thinking about, am I in a stable relationship? Or am I married? Do I have a house? Do I have a dog? Do I have a child? And all these big things that kind of I know I grew up thinking, well, by 30, I will have it all figured out. And then so often we turn 30 and we're like, we have nothing figured out. Hello everyone and welcome back to very beginning. Today my co-host Bella is literally here in my screen, so I suggest you watch this beginning with video because it's quite funny. She just jumped on this little chair behind me as I was starting to record, so I just wanted to quickly press start while she was still here because I think she's gonna go back to her bed in a second. But yes, that's my beautiful puppy slash co-host Bella here in the background. But yes, I hope you're doing well. I hope you had a nice Easter break. I decided to take a bit of an unplanned Easter break myself. I had my mom visiting and then a really dear friend from the US. And I was actually like even not planning to not have an episode go live that week, and had like the script and everything already ready. But it was just so busy with work things, with life things, and I was just feeling like a bit drained. So I kind of reminded myself of, hey, maybe it's time to also sometimes practice what you preach. We have this saying in German, that it goes, der Schuster hat die schlechtesten Schuhe, which means that the shoemaker himself or herself always wears the worst shoes. And I definitely am guilty of that. Like I talk so much about, taking care of yourself, of your body, of your mental health. But then when it comes to things when I just want to, get things done or set myself certain, to-do lists, or tasks, I really struggle with taking like those time outs when I really need them. So last week was just a bit of an attempt to practice a bit of what I preach. And yeah, just take a bit of a week off from recording, from uploading a new episode. So I appreciate you still sticking around, and yeah, just can really give this message to you that if you ever feel like things are getting a bit too much, that sometimes taking those teeny tiny breaks, however small or long you need them, can really help you to reset and just feel so much better. But yes, today we're back with a new episode, and in honor of spring finally being here, although in London it doesn't fully feel like it, to be honest. I'm looking out of the window and it's quiet gray, but let's say spring is finally here. And I know for many people, if you kind of believe in astrology, spring is also the start of really like this new astrological year. So it's kind of the time when also many people set themselves goals and kind of almost like a second January 1st in a sense. So I really want to dedicate an episode to kind of the societal struggles that we are all under when it comes to comparing ourselves to others, or when it comes to accepting, that kind of we all do things in our own time. And I think this is a really relevant topic for anyone's fertility journey, because here it can really, be so important to remember that these comparisons can be so toxic and so difficult. But I think also really this topic, and that's why I also wanted to make this episode, can be, helpful to anyone, because we all struggle with that. We all always feel like we are falling behind, or that others, are more successful or are succeeding more than we do. So really wanted to take a minute to talk about this topic, because it really feels like it's another taboo topic for itself. I think this year I already turned 31, but last year when I turned 30, I remember that topic became so predominant, because I don't know what it is about age 30. And I mean, maybe once I'm there at age 40 or at age 50, it will be the same. I remember it being as kind of a big of a deal when I turned 20. But with 30, it really feels like such a milestone in so many ways. And I've also talked to friends of mine about this. And so for so many people, and it does feel like, especially women, we are kind of under a whole nother pressure given the whole biological clock situation. And we'll get into that in a second. But it just really feels like this, kind of mountain of pressure that we really put on ourselves. I mean, to some degree, also society puts it on us. Maybe some families put it also on other, you kind of on each other. But in so many ways, I think it's really us ourselves that are doing this to us. And when I turned 30, it was kind of really a, reflection of, well, where did I want to be and have I accomplished that? Because for so many, kind of 30 means, well, you need to be really settled in your career. You have to have figured out where you're going and kind of in the process of climbing that corporate ladder. Or if you founded your own, but like if you wanted to be an entrepreneur, you had to kind of make it happen by now. I mean, things like Forbes 30 under 30 can definitely be motivating, but I think they also create a lot of stress and anxiety because seeing what all these super young people have already accomplished, I found myself so often being like, oh my God, I'm totally falling behind. But also in your personal life, right? Like thinking about, am I in a stable relationship? Or am I married? Do I have a house? Do I have a dog? Do I have a child? And all these big things that kind of or I know I grew up thinking, well, by 30, I will have it all figured out. And then so often we turn 30 and we're like, we have nothing figured out. Or sometimes even we turn 40 or 50. And I'm just here to say, and that's totally fine. And everyone is on their own timeline. But it's still hard. And I think it's okay to talk about that it's still hard because it's easy to say like, well, just don't worry about it. But at the end of the day, we still do. So I think that's why it's so important to talk about stuff like that and to really, listen to each other and also hear that like, hey, I'm having these thoughts, but maybe also you're having these thoughts. And then if we exchange them, it just makes us feel a bit less alone and a bit less like we're failing at life just because we don't have XYZ by a certain age. In a fertility context, of course, 30 does also mark some kind of milestone. I did always imagine having at least my first child by age 30, or maybe not at least. I kind of was hoping to have one child by age 30. And so that realization really hit hard when I kind of knew that's not going to happen. I mean, for one, like that miscarriage that I had really hit hard because that if that pregnancy would have been successful, it would have meant that by age 30 I would have already been a mother. But at the same time, when we kind of continued trying and that approached that month where based on my calculations, I knew, well, now there's no way that it can happen that I will have this, accomplished goal in some way or form by age 30. It just really hit hard. And it's so weird that it does, because in so many ways, like 30 is still not old at all, right? Even in a fertility context, and I've talked about it in other episodes, it's still really a good age. I mean, depending on how your fertility is looking, like how many eggs you'd have left and everything, but it's still not like you're not at a place where you really, really need to worry about those stuff. But still, like it was still quite. I was almost surprised by how much it affected me to think like, okay, am I kind of falling behind? And also, again, looking outside to maybe friends of mine who already had accomplished having a family by that age, or maybe were even younger than me and had already accomplished that. It just really did make me feel bad. So I kind of, asked myself, why is that? And how can I help myself not to feel like that? And maybe how can I help you or others, especially other women, to not feel like that? And that's kind of really how this episode came about. Because it's interesting, I try to practice so much gratitude and self-reflection, but still sometimes you just see things on, let's say, social media that really trigger you. And it could be on LinkedIn, it could be on Instagram, where you just see that someone achieved something. And it doesn't even have to be, in a fertility context. It can be a certain, maybe professional milestone or something else. And you just immediately feel like, oh my God, I mean, happy for that person, but also start thinking about, wait, I haven't accomplished that. What does that mean for me, right? And maybe I'm working towards exactly the same goal, but I feel like I'm so far away from it, or I'm so far behind. So, yeah, I kind of came up with a few different tips and tricks of things that I try to do when I start feeling like this, in the hopes that it can also help you out there, kind of embrace these emotions and allow them to happen. Because I will never say like don't feel like that, because I don't think that's ever realistic. But just in the hopes that maybe those few little tips and tricks can help you just feel a bit better about yourself and be a little less harsh on yourself. So the first thing that I always try to do is kind of remind myself of that concept of really taking one step at a time. And that sounds so cliche, and maybe that sounds so easy, but it's really not. And I remember, like, I grew up always hearing the saying, like, well, Rome wasn't built in a day. Remember, you have to work hard for certain things. It doesn't happen overnight. But I feel like sometimes I still tend to really forget that so often kind of the biggest goals or the biggest dreams that we have, they are journeys that takes quite a bit of time to accomplish. And yes, of course, there are some people who have overnight successes where things come really easy. But first of all, I mean, you never know what these people have to deal with, also. And second, right, it doesn't mean that they didn't work hard. And also, these are exceptions to the rule. So I think it's also really important to remind ourselves, like when we're seeing someone accomplish something and kind of those feelings creep in, right? And kind of you think like, oh, but wow, this person's already there and I'm so far away from it, that every person most likely had to sacrifice so much to get to this point, right? And had to, work so hard to get where they are now. So it might seem, quite easy from the outside, might seem like quite easy for you seeing where that person is, but at the end of the day, we never know how many little steps that person had to take to really get to where they are today. I also recently saw this really cute quote from this, actually it's a children's book called The Boy, the Mole, the Fox, and the Horse. I don't know if you heard about that one. But I heard this quote and I thought it was so fitting. And again, it kind of inspired me to do this episode, which essentially goes, I can't see a way through, said the boy. Well, can you see your next step? Yes. Just take that, said the horse. And I thought that was so interesting because it's really about that, right? About not overthinking about, oh my God, how do we get to this huge goal that we have? But really like taking this one step at a time. Literally, sometimes it's one foot, in front of the other. It's getting out of bed. I don't know, it's washing your hair. No matter like if you're feeling really down, it's really those teeny tiny steps. So if you have this business idea, maybe it's doing this vision board or just, writing down something on a piece of paper. Or if it's a fertility thing, maybe it's just, calling a fertility clinic or, buying some ovulation sticks, like whatever it is. Sometimes it can help so much to really just take this teeny tiny step. And it was interesting because for me in a fertility context, and I kind of try to, apply those to the fertility context, so they're also relevant for those who are still in that bucket and kind of going through that journey. But also I'm trying to keep it a bit general for others that maybe have, kind of other, things on their mind. But in a fertility context, for me, it was really kind of understanding how long this journey can become and that it's not going to be super easy for us. So it was interesting because after kind of experiencing that loss, I came to realize that the goal for me, kind of that, that end goal is not even to see a positive pregnancy test, unfortunately. And it feels so weird to say that because for so many people, I mean, I feel so blessed to even have experienced that. And I know for so many people, even to get to that step, it takes years over years, and maybe they will never see that. But for me, having experienced that loss, it just kind of helped mentally to just see even that positive pregnancy step as a step literally in the entire process. So, and that doesn't mean not to be happy about it, like still being super happy about it, but almost like as this base camp to my climb to holding this perfect teeny tiny squishy baby hopefully one day, but just to really seeing it as like this is a stepping stone, this is like a base camp on my climb to Mount Everest or whatever mountain you want to use. And I think mentally that just really helped to see it as that and to not put all my hopes and dreams into it, but just to have maybe even a bit more of a realistic approach. So that's kind of what helped me, but I'm sure it can be so different for others. So I don't want to say like don't get excited, because absolutely, like, you should still get excited, and I think it's great to go in with as much positivity as you can. But for me personally, it just really helped to see it as like one stepping stone in a longer journey. The second thing I always try to remind myself is that concept really about everyone being on their own journey or everyone having their own timeline. And I think this one is especially really tricky when we think about those kind of age milestones that I was talking about in the beginning of the episode. I actually did an episode in season 1 with Anisha. I can link it below, which was all about her achieving this amazing milestone of being on the Forbes 30 under 30 list with her business. But it was really interesting to then hear in the recording that I did with her that she was actually, while she was so proud and grateful for everything she achieved in her professional space or in her career, that she didn't feel like she was anywhere near where she wanted to be in her personal life, right? And kind of she was struggling a lot with that. So I think that just again goes to show that everyone really is on their own journey, and it doesn't mean that maybe you were advancing in one facet and in the other. So I'll definitely link that episode below because I found that quite eye-opening to see that there is no, even if it might look from the outside like someone is achieving or accomplishing anything that you might be dreaming of, maybe on the inside they might feel like they're absolutely not and something is missing. In a fertility context, when we think about that, it of course does become a bit tricky and challenging when we think about things like the biological clock. And I've talked a lot about that concept of kind of age 35 being a bit of like this age where things can start to tip on the other side, right? Where kind of your egg quality, your egg quantity start to quite rapidly decline. So when we think about, that things might be different. Everyone is on their own timeline, their own journey, which means by age 35, not everyone might be, in a place where they feel in a career safe enough or stable enough to have kids, or maybe they haven't found the right partner yet, or whatever it is. But I think for all those reasons, egg freezing and embryo freezing are such fantastic options, which is why I'm really so fond of them and advocate for them so loudly. I think also in a career context, it can be really challenging as you see your friends, kind of going a bit maybe faster than you are. Maybe they're achieving different things and, kind of go at different speeds. But for me personally, I think what I found really the trickiest is, especially going back to that fertility context, seeing how, some of my friends who are maybe even younger than me, kind of get pregnant super easy and do not have any struggles with it. But also I experience kind of the other side of friends that then also have struggles and for years struggle with fertility and are also going through IVF. And it's interesting because I kind of, felt almost in the middle because we did have this quite successful round of embryo freezing. So I felt so fortunate, to have a amount of embryos that we were happy with after just one round. But it's really hard because on one hand, if you're kind of in the middle, you almost feel bad because those friends who, where it was so easy and, they just easily got pregnant or whatever, and they're celebrating like all these milestones or whatever it is, like baby's first birthdays, baby showers, you might of course feel a bit like bad about it and just a bit sad and not even sometimes, kind of feeling up for it. But on the other hand, I also found myself, looking at other friends who are going through IVF maybe for much longer than we are and who need to still do many more rounds, almost like feeling guilty that it was quite easy. So it's really hard being, kind of on either side. And I think that's why this concept of really internalizing that everyone has their own unique journey is so, so important. And I think the advice that I can really give here, also even like for people listening who might be even on either spectrum, is that I still really appreciate being, kind of invited to all kind of different milestone celebrations of friends where it was really easy, let's say, to get pregnant. Because one thing that I really didn't want to feel as like isolated or left out. So as I always preach, like communication is key. So I really appreciated still being, included and invited. And then it was kind of up to me to be like, okay, I don't know, maybe this one is too hard, maybe it's too close to the heart or whatever is going on currently in my life. So maybe it's, I had to kindly decline or just like kind of explain that I couldn't make it. But I still really appreciated kind of my friends incorporating me and not thinking like, oh, she's too fragile to handle this children's birthday. And at the same time, also, kind of from the other side with friends who were struggling even more than we did with things like IVF or fertility issues, to also just have like a really open approach in a way of like not thinking that just because I went through something similar, I can completely understand what they're feeling. Because I think this concept of everyone being on their own journey also means that everyone is really experiencing it in their own unique way. And what I also found is, if you talk to someone and you hear like, oh, maybe that person even shares with you, I had a miscarriage or I went through IVF, and you just say like, oh, I completely understand you. I went through the same. I think it can be sometimes a little bit challenging because it almost, kind of degrades what the other person is telling you, or kind of, you're almost being like, oh, I completely understand you. I went through the same. Like, no journey is the same. And we should always be like really, really careful with allowing people to still share their personal journey and share their feelings. And maybe they experience it completely different than you have. And yes, I think, of course, in some ways, it is a bit easier for me to understand what other people are going through if having experienced IVF or fertility struggles myself. But I just really always try to internalize. And I mean, I make that mistake myself sometimes, but really, really try to just switch to the listening mode and not being too easy to think that I can completely understand, comprehend what that person is going through, because it is different for every person, and not every person is also taking kind of a similar open approach to talking about it like I do. So really having this open mind to accepting that not everyone is only on their own journey, but also everyone will experience things in a completely unique and different way, even if the experiences might seem similar, I think is such an important concept. And then the third and last one, which really helped me in many situations when I felt a bit, kind of down or behind, was really thinking about that where I am today was where I wanted to be 5 years ago. So basically, like where I am today, as of this moment, 5 years ago, I was dreaming about being at this point. And it's a really interesting one because we totally forget to do that. I feel like as humans, we're designed to always think about the next big thing and the next big thing, right? And kind of, okay, I accomplished that check mark. What do I do next? And oh, I already have XYZ, but I'm missing, kind of so I have to, I still feel like I'm failing or falling behind. And then we kind of tend to almost forget to appreciate that what we already accomplished, and that maybe a past version of ours would have been so happy to have XYZ like that we have now. But we still always have this mindset of thinking about what's missing rather than acknowledging what we actually have and appreciating that. And I think that's absolutely human. Like, I don't think we can ever fully separate ourselves from that, but I think it just sometimes helps to be aware of it and to remind ourselves of, kind of that's happening, and that's what I can do to almost like battle it and not fall victim to these thoughts. So for me, for instance, as an example, I now live in London for the third time in my life. I lived here once before when I was like 16 for an exchange year, and then the second time around when I think I was about 23. It was my first job right after university. And that second time living here was really so kind of interesting, I would say now in retrospect, because it was my first job out of university. I was completely, kind of head over heels into like career mode. And what it kind of ended with was me fully burning out, feeling alone, feeling isolated, not really going out, just like not having any form of work-life balance, and just being like completely lost. And it's interesting because I was thinking about, I mean, that's more than 5 years ago now, but still, even comparing, where I am now and where I was then. And it's really like looking at two different people. And I don't even mean from kind of where I am now in a professional sense or in a personal space, but really where I am just now as kind of an individual, where I am now as someone who knows exactly what they want, what they don't want, what, kind of all the experiences I made in between, knowing that kind of what really, or feeling now what really my mission in life is and what I want to do. And even though I'm so far away from, kind of all the different big goals I've set for myself, maybe for the next decade, but it still feels like I am on the right path now, taking it step by step. But kind of reminding myself of where I was 5 or 10 years ago, still makes me really appreciate of where I am today, and really just appreciate of kind of how far I come, even from like a self-awareness standpoint, and especially kind of, when it comes to setting boundaries, so taking care of myself. And of course, also in a fertility context, it's an interesting one to think about, right? Because I mean, it makes sense to think that every shot is taking you closer to that goal. But I think if we think about kind of that those time frames, and maybe it's not 5 years, maybe you are lucky enough that your fertility journey isn't quite as long, but even if we think in terms of a few months, or whatever it is, it also really helps to just appreciate kind of that step that maybe you got a bit closer to your goal. So again, for me, that could be a year or 2 years ago, not knowing exactly what was happening in my body or why it wasn't working, right? Or not having identified that issue with kind of the dropping AMH that I had, or even not knowing that despite the loss that I could get naturally pregnant, right? Like kind of all those things, and where I am now to kind of knowing, okay, I have this more or less safety blanket of having a few embryos frozen and knowing what's going on in my body and having regulated my cycle so much through acupuncture and all these other things. So really appreciating kind of where you are now and how far you've come. I think it's just such an important mindset to have. And as kind of like a small tip or trick that helps me, and I talked about this before, this because I am such a visual person. So what really helps me is really creating those vision or mood boards. And I think I showed you before, I talked to you about this before, that I have kind of like a mood board for every year that I have as my phone background, kind of my goals for the year of things that inspire me. But it also really helps to just go back and see kind of what kind of vision or mood board did you have a year from today, or 2 years from today, or 3 years from today. And it's so insane to see that sometimes some of these things came true, and that you like literally like manifested them, or however you want to call it, but that you reached that goal, and maybe in a different way than you had back then imagined, but in some way or form that you're exactly there where you wanted to be when you put together those pictures in your vision or mood board. So yeah, those are just a few small hopefully helpful tips and tricks that I try to do. And I think with all of those, it's just so important to internalize that we are not perfect, that we will probably as humans always struggle with those emotions, and that is absolutely fine. But that talking about them does not mean that we're like ungrateful or jealous or whatever, but that it's completely fine and that we all struggle with it. And that's just, I guess, the message that I want to give with that episode, or put out with that episode, that is absolutely fine to feel in those ways, but it's just good to sometimes take a moment, maybe do one or two of those things that I talked about, to just feel grateful, and remind ourselves of how far we've come, and that it is really one step at a time, and that you are on your own unique journey, and that that's absolutely fine. So that is it for today. I hope you enjoyed this episode. And if you have any other questions, or maybe if you have any tips for how you deal with, kind of comparing yourselves to others, pop them in the comments. I'd love to see any other tips and tricks that you have, and maybe we can learn from each other. Of course, also really appreciate if you leave a like or subscribe if you're on YouTube. Of course, also if you're listening on any podcasting platform, appreciate if you follow and leave a review. So thank you so much for listening, and I look forward to seeing you next time.